Okay, I have the privilege of introducing some of the speakers. This particular one I'm really excited about because Bill Burnett is someone I've known for a number of years when we first began to talk about this subject. Bill is the executive director of the design program at Stanford. He's an adjunct professor of mechanical engineering. After years of drawing cars and airplanes under his grandmother's sewing machine, Bill Burnett went off to the university and he discovered, much to his surprise, that there were people in the world who did this kind of thing every day without the sewing machine. And they were called designers. 45 years, 5 companies, and a couple of thousand students later, Bill is drawing and building things, teaching others how to do the same, and quietly enjoying the fact that no one has discovered that he's having way too much fun. Bill Burnett is an adjunct professor and executive director of the Life Design Lab at Stanford. He received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Product Design at Stanford and has worked in startups and Fortune 100 companies, including 7 years at Apple, designing award-winning laptops, and a number of years in the toy industry, designing Star Wars action toys. So my grandson thinks he wants me to get his autograph because that'll make me important. He holds a number of mechanical and design patents and design awards, and in addition to his duties at Stanford, he advises several of his student startup companies, and he's the author of a really cool book that's on your table this morning. Bill, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Everything Rick said in the introduction, I completely agree with, and it turned out that we were accidentally doing exactly the same thing when he contacted us. And if you don't mind, I'm going to walk around. I can't stand behind the podium thing, so I'll make sure I'm loud enough on the mic. You can hear okay? All right, great. So I talked, when I pulled up my slide deck before, it was 2018 was the last time we actually got together, and Dave Evans and I came and did a talk. So this is we started the Life Design Lab in 2007, so 16 years of prototyping, meaning and purpose in higher education, without letting anybody know that was what we were actually doing. When Dave Evans, my partner, and I started this, we talked to lots of different people on campus, and we got the advice that if they found out we were going to be teaching the students anything about meaning and purpose, we'd be run off the campus immediately, because for whatever reason, about 50 years ago, secular universities decided that talking about what education was actually for would just be a big problem, and so we stopped doing it. But I'm a designer. As Rick mentioned, I've spent most of my career in design, and so that thing where, when all you got is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, all I know how to do is design, and my students were struggling, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And so we decided to do a design intervention. I want to show you a commercial some students made. We work a lot with our students. The students know why other students come to class. So I asked the students, make a commercial for me. And in those days, we were up on YouTube. Now we're up on, because you got to go where the students are. But this is our commercial, probably circa 2010. Can I have the sound, please? Move, start it back. We'll go back again. Give me the sound on the thing, please. Thanks. Ready? It's you guys, not me. The sound comes through HDMI. Oh, we gotta have the sound. It's so good. It's not on the computer. The computer's ready to go. We checked it. All right, down there. Yeah. All right, ready. Well, the sound is really, really good. We'll just keep going. I had the student, and strangely enough, the students remember the Game of Life, which I think came out in the 60s or something. So, and it was a game of life, and they're going through the game of life, and when they get to college, oh my God, what do I got to do? And they're picking cards from the concept thing. And in those days, the class was called Designing the Authentic Life, Mechanical Engineering 104B, and the question, the thing posed, if you're struggling trying to figure out the meaning of life, come take our class. That's my buddy Dave Evans. We co-founded the lab. In the early days, it was just me and Dave running around the campus trying to find any room we could teach in because we can't teach in a lecture hall. We teach a studio class. We need a studio setup. And there's very few, surprisingly, on the massive Stanford campus, there's only 2 places we can teach, the 2 buildings that have multi-purpose rooms and only about 5 classrooms we can teach in. Dave couldn't be here today, but we wrote the book. We wrote another book on work life. And our mission in the lab has always been, to apply the innovation principles of design thinking to the wicked problem of designing your life at and after college. We do mid-career workshops. We do retirement workshops. Dave's running in another program that deals with people who have retired. That's a kind of technical definition, so, we say, well, really, we just teach the class that helps you figure out what you want to be when you grow up. The former dean of engineering, Jim Blum, said, I want to take that class, because he was about to step down from the dean. And it turns out this is one of those sort of pernicious questions that people ask people all the time, particularly young people. What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do when you go to college? What do you want to do? What are you going to major in? Like a 17-year-old knows, like you should give a 17-year-old permission to decide what your 40-year-old is going to do for a living. That's a great idea. But this actually needs a reframe because we don't believe in growing up at the lab. If growing up means you lose your creativity or you lose your sense of wonder, you lose your childlike curiosity, that's a bad thing. So the reframe is really, we teach the classes that help you figure out what you want to grow into as your life design unfolds. And it's been a pretty successful thing. I started full-time at Stanford in 2006 when David Kelley started the D School. He called me up, teaching for years, just as a part-time when I was in industry, and he said, hey, I need somebody to help with the program. Could you come in and run the program for me because I'm starting this thing called the D School. And then in 2007, Dave Evans and I got together and we created the first version of the class. I have an amazing team. Kathy Davies, who runs the lab, and then phenomenal lab fellows who teach the classes better than I do. This is not a Bill and Dave thing. Anyone can teach this class. You just need to understand the methodology and the pedagogy. It's really, it's tricky, but it's straightforward. Amazing fellows, fantastic support. And some of these folks have been with the lab 6, 7 years now. It's quite something. Stanford being in Silicon Valley and being an educational institution, one of our big challenges is hiring and retaining talent. Any of these people could go work for a HR team or talent team or a D&I team at Google, Apple, Facebook, and get paid twice what I'm paying them, easily. But they stay because they think the mission's important because of all the things that Rick talked about. So we have 3 classes right now: Designing Your Life, Designing Your Stanford. Designing Your Life is for juniors and seniors. Designing Your Stanford is for freshmen, sophomores. The tagline on Designing Your Stanford is, don't do Stanford like you did high school or you'll miss the whole damn thing. You got in. Stop that behavior. But it's really hard for them because the only thing they know how to do is to get in to things. And Stanford's an interesting place because if you take the top 1% of all the smart kids in all the high schools in America and the world and you put them together, as my buddy Dave will say, every pile has a top and a bottom. Take all the smart kids, put them in a pile. Guess what? Likely you're in the middle. And you've never been in the middle before. You've never gotten a B before. You've never struggled in a class before. And so it's an interesting group to work with because it's a real transformation for them as they grow into their more adult self. And then Designing the Professional because the Dean of Graduate Studies came and said the grad students are dying and they're suffering, particularly the PhD students. Could you do a class for them? So we do. The interesting thing about the Designing the Professional class, mostly PhD students, primarily from the sciences side of the university, but some humanities PhDs as well. The class will be 70 or 80 or 90 students, but the enrollment only says 20. I'm always asked, why is your enrollment so low? I said, because the other 70 students have asked us if we could not put it on their transcript because they don't want their PI to know they're taking a class. Right? That gives you a little bit of a sense of what it's like to be in a lab at a big research university. Dave's now primarily teaching in the DCI program, the Distinguished Career Institute. This is, we call it gap years for grown-ups. People who've already had a nice career, maybe have retired, they come back to Stanford for a year. They join the DCI group. Their mission is renewing purpose, building community, recalibrating health and wellness. They're basically rebooting themselves into their encore careers. Amazing people, phenomenal students. And if you're in the DCI program, you can take any class in any of the 8 schools at Stanford. Business school, law school, medical school, the New School of Sustainability. And this cohort of people there, I think they're on their 8th or 9th cohort. It's just extraordinary folks to work with. And I've actually had some of them in my classes. They're really amazing people to have in class. And they sort of act as surrogate mentors for the regular undergraduate students. So Dave's teaching in that program. And then we have a brand new program we call the Affinity Spaces Project. We're teaching a class called Designing the Black Experiences at Stanford and Designing Your Muslim Life. I'll tell you more about those in a second. So how did we start this thing? Well, how did designers start anything? Dave and I got together. I said the students are struggling. They seem like they're smart kids, but they seem like they can't handle certain basic things like how do I grow into my adult self? How do I find meaning and purpose? How do I establish identity? All the questions that Rick mentioned. And we start with empathy. We just went out and talked to a whole bunch of students before we ran any classes. And then we ran a very small prototype, 6 students that I knew I just invited to come to an evening thing. We ran 2 sessions for an hour or 2, and at the end of those 2 sessions, we said we were done, and the students refused to leave. They refused to leave the classroom. He said, no, we don't have any more curriculum. They said, it's not about you, it's about us. We don't have any place to have this conversation. You have stimulated a conversation we've been dying to have, but we didn't know how to have it, and you gave us a couple of frameworks and prompts, and so we're staying. We actually stayed until the janitors locked the building, I don't know, at midnight that night, and just listened to the students talk about what it's like to be a student. This is 2007. Things are a little different now. And so we realized there was a problem that they weren't being able to talk about what's my education for, what will work be like, and moreover, what's this whole like human endeavor thing? I'm kind of, 18 to 22, I'm figuring out who I am. I'm trying lots of different identities on for size, but I'm not really sure where I'm going. And aren't I supposed to know? Because there's this problem that the students get stuck. And they're supposed to know because they think a bunch of things are true that aren't true, what psychologists call dysfunctional beliefs. Either it's literally not true, or it's not actionable, so it's not useful to believe these things. Just gave you 3 of them. What's your passion? I don't know. Every student says, yeah, everybody keeps asking me what's my passion. I don't know. I don't have one, or I have 5. Which one do you want to hear about first? We are at a research university. We believe in assessments and we believe in data, so I can't just make stuff up and say Bill thinks this. That would not be cool where I work. So we went over to the Center for the Study of Adolescence, Bill Damon's group. He's wrote a couple of amazing books, including one called Path to Purpose. In Bill's research, less than 20% of people have any identifiable singular passion. So that means 8 out of 10 people, when asked that question, are going to get I don't know. But because the question has been asked and you believe the framework behind the question is true, you say, well, if I don't, you wouldn't be asking me for my passion unless I was supposed to have one. Everybody else must have one. So there must be something wrong with me. And we don't like questions that leave 8 out of 10 people feeling bad. Now, if you were a passionate person or you grew up knowing exactly what you wanted to do, that's awesome. Go for it. Interestingly enough, in Bill's research, passion emerges most frequently in the arts. I want to sing, I want to dance, I want to compose, I want to write poetry. But of course, those are the things we discourage our children from practicing because you can't get a job as a poet. So even if they had one, we squash it and then we, tell them, go find another one, a better one, and they don't have it. Anyway, so 8 out of 10 people can't answer this question in the positive, so we blow up this myth. The other one is that if you just picked the right major, when we started this program, that would have been pre-med. Now it's CS, computer science. Obviously, computer science is the right major. Then you would end up with success, which equals money, and then you'll be happy. And Professor Waldinger from Harvard will explain why that is completely ridiculous information. And we've known for years since Martin Seligman and the happiness movement and everything, that there's these things don't correlate at all. Now, I have some first-gen students, fly students. I've got, students from all over the world. Many of them, college is a new experience, or they believe that they're representing the culture they come from, and their success, including success for money, has a lot to do with whether or not they can support the families and communities they came from. So it's not that we're against this, but it's just the whole idea that I got to pick the major that makes the most money, even if I'm no good at it. It's so debilitating, and so we unpack that for them. And then, of course, you have to be the best version of yourself. Everybody's supposed to be optimizing yourself. At the same time, we have this fear of missing out. So there's 628 clubs at Stanford. I need to join all of them. I'm going to double major with a minor, and I'm going to keep all my options open. And then on and on and on and on. And of course, this is the most stressed, most lonely, most anxious generation we've ever educated. So we try to unpack this stuff and just level set the whole room. And the room will look a lot like this, round table, 6 people at a table, to sort of just get them to start thinking about what's actually true for them and stop listening to this cultural narrative, which is so destructive. Throw social media and everything else on top of that, and you have a crisis. So we tell them it's time to think differently, think like a designer. We apply design tools to this problem. That's the classic design thinking diagram. You start with empathy, redefine the problem, come up with lots of ideas, prototype and test. In life design, we add one more step called accept. You can't solve a problem you're not willing to have. So what are you willing to work on? And let's get serious. What are you willing to work on? Because until you're ready to change something, nothing's going to happen. We spend a lot of time in this process because in addition to all the other stresses, it's really hard for them to sort of stay on topic. Between their cell phone beeping, 5 times a minute and all the other things that are going on in their lives, to really say, to work on something and to actually make a change is hard. It takes time. It'll take time and consistent effort. And particularly, I've noticed in the last 5 years, this generation is hooked on novelty, and they don't understand mastery. I want something new, and I want to be stimulated over and over and over again, but I don't want to work on anything. I don't want to work on any one thing very long. And you can't make change until you're committed to working on something. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to establish a new habit or to break an old one. So we work a lot on that. Our quarters are 10 weeks long, so we have enough time to really move through that process and get a few things done. Mostly we teach them about mindsets, curiosity, reframing problems, radical collaboration. The answers are in the world with other people. Get off your phone. Texting somebody isn't the same thing as talking to somebody. That's challenging for them. But we lean into the mindsets a lot because this is where we open up the space for new ideas and new ways of thinking. Pedagogy is problem-based learning. There are no tests. Every class is a series of exercises. We don't even think of the classes as classes. They're performances. There's a script. There's a time. Every exercise is timed to the minute. The team at Bowling Green has experienced our fascination with minute-by-minute timing. For everything we do, and we build the class around what we call the 4 C's. So the container is the room, the space that we are in. Once you're in the space, you don't leave. you can host yourself, go to the restroom or something. We keep a space where we can have the conversation. The construct's design thinking and positive psychology. The community is what we build at the table and in the room and in the larger community of design practitioners of this work. And the conversation is that structured, scaffolded conversation about a specific topic that has to do with meaning, purpose, life, something, through the lens of design. So we're going to prototype something. We're going to brainstorm something. We're going to reframe something. We're going to prototype and test something. And the class, in addition to the tightly scripted set of slides and a tightly scripted process, we draw a diagram about the energy. When are we getting up and moving around? When are we playing music? When are we sitting down and thinking hard? When are we getting up again and moving? So it's a bit complex, but it creates an experience. It's an experience design that then has a 10-week arc, which ends in them creating three completely different plans for their lives, including if what they do has nothing to do with what they studied in college. The data is less than 20% of them will be doing anything that had to do with what they studied in college 10 years out. So you better have a couple of other plans, because this one might not work. Anyway, we do that, and it all happens around that table. The classes look like this. They're very dynamic. Even if it's 60 students, it's 10 tables of 6, and that group of 6 is your community for the whole 10 weeks. They become very, very close to one another, and they learn how to create relationships that are different than the relationships they have normally in their dormitories. So it's a pretty interesting transformation. The framework is the design thinking thing. We say that, well, yeah, but that's the process we're going to use to discover stuff, but what's it all about? What's the meaning-making layer of this? And then what's the support layer? How do we support your journey through life? Because it isn't just about Stanford, it's the whole thing. And the meaning-making layer, we talk about social identity, we talk about your worldview, we talk about your work view, which creates sort of a compass for your direction. And then we talk about, practices, discernment, mentors, community. Discernment we describe as making good decisions with more than your prefrontal cortex. You need emotional intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, social intelligence. You need spirituality, if that's part of your worldview. You don't just make decisions with pro and con lists. That's not how life works. So we teach them all that stuff. We draw heavily from these guys. But in the last 4 or 5 years, we've noticed that these guys are all old white guys. So we've added in a bunch of new voices. Ruth Chang, who's a philosopher, talks about making hard choices. Dr. Angel Acosta, he's at the Columbia Teachers College, and he gave us a whole D&I curriculum, and he works on trauma and trauma recovery. Many of our students, our black students or brown students and other students, are traumatized by the way the world is going and by the constant evidence of police brutality against black and brown people. And then Joy Blum-Winnie, who was the student who outed AI biases. And so we talk a lot about new technologies. We use ChatGPT in class this year. I use it a lot. I use it with my students to come up with ideas, brainstorm classes. I actually asked Chat to give me an introduction, or to thank you for the introduction, but it was too long, so I didn't use it. But thank you for my introduction. Anyway, we're constantly looking at, particularly after 2020, redid the entire curriculum to look at where were we only having white-centered points of view or white voices, where were we excluding other voices. And if you go looking, there's just a vast array of brilliant people to quote from. And so we wanted to make sure the students felt more included, and this has really been useful. The syllabus looks like this, and this is literally what we show students. We don't have a thing. We just say, this is the picture that you're going to have. You're going to have exercises and or reflections and or activities in every one of these places, and we can relate it always back to the framework. And so, although it's, we call it ideas and tools, it's not a, this is the way you design your life, step 1, step 2, step 3. That doesn't work. Lives are more complicated than that. We don't want people to be lost, so we locate everything back in the framework. Now, what I thought I would talk about more than that, that was just to sort of give you a background of what the classes are like. And they all use roughly the same thing. Even when Dave's doing stuff with the Distinguished Career Institute, median age 65, or I'm working with freshmen, 18 and 19, it's the same curriculum, but it changes the context, or the context changes what we talk about and what we emphasize one way or another. But things have changed a lot since we started in 2007. Because in 2006, this thing called the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford, which was misnamed the D School. It's not a school. But we kind of liked the D School name because it pissed off the B School. And we thought that was kind of fun. But when that started, and design, well, we had a design program at Stanford since 1963. I got my degrees from that program in the 70s. But this is the first time we kind of went national and talked about design in a different way. And so at that point, everybody wanted to come over to the D School and take a class. So if I put up a class called Designing Your Anything, I got 300 students signed up, and we were overbooked, and the classes always had a big waiting list. And we called the class at the time the Designer's Voice, because we were leaning into that design thing. And this was the framework. We weren't quite there yet, but it was, think, do, know. And, we had about jobs and mentors and poetry. We still do a poetry class. I love assigning poems to engineering students. It's wonderful. It terrorizes them in a beautiful way. Really it was head, heart, and hands. That was the original framework. And as we described it at that time in 2007, we were the only popsicle stand in the desert. There was no other place on campus to come to have this conversation. And we wrapped it in a design wrapper, so it seemed pretty safe. And it was fun, and people came over, and the classes were always oversubscribed. And at this point, it was just me and Dave. We didn't have funding for a lab or anything. And then that evolved and got, moved and changed a little bit and got better. And then we got some more funding. More people on campus decided to back us. Originally, it was the Career Center. They said, you seem to be doing something, and they're not as lost, and they kind of know what to ask for. Can you help us figure that out? He said, sure. And then the undergraduate dean, Harry Elam, who's now, I think, president at Occidental, said, hey, can you do something for the freshmen? And we said, sure. And then, so it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it got bigger, all these different places were sort of helping fund this. And then Zoom 16 years later, I don't know if you saw the MIT Technology Review magazine that just came out. I think it's the either March or April edition. Had a lovely article called The Postmortem on Design Thinking. Design Thinking is dead. And this is interesting. If you go, when I go around the world and I talk about design or design thinking, a lot of people, almost everyone has heard of it. And I think when it first started, there were what I call high expectations, low understanding. This is really cool. What is it? And now there's low understanding and more negative. I've heard it doesn't work. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that I'm not going to go into. But one of the things that we learned from the D School is the D School was a very open curriculum, philosophy. Put all of our decks, our boot camps and everything up on the web. Anybody can have them. Knock yourself out. Teach yourself design thinking. Go. And I think that had some positive impact, and also the possibility that people would implement things poorly, because although it seems simple, it's actually rather complex. When we decided to give our class to anybody who wanted it in 2017, we opened our first studio. We said, we're not going to do it that way, because it's a little too tricky to just say, here's the class, you'll figure it out. And there are many people, I've talked to a bunch of people in the room who are actually just teaching from the book as a text, which is awesome, it's great. But if you'd like support, including, about a terabyte worth of decks, pedagogy, scripts, and everything else, we're happy to give it to you. But you gotta well, you used to have to come to Stanford. Now we do it all online. You got to come and we got to teach you how this works, because it seems simple, but it's not. This idea of programming a class as an experience, that's new to most instructors. The idea of using the principles of experience design to create something that sticks is new to most people. And even the whole design thinking thing, even though it seems simple, there's an ontology and an epistemology to it that's a little bit tricky. So so people come online to Stanford, 4 days worth of training, including taking the class yourself so you have the felt experience of it, and then learning how we teach the class, and then we spend a day helping you prototype the version of this class for your university, community college, whatever it is. And all we ask is that you have enough support from a dean or somebody that says, we'll let you try this. And then we teach you how to prototype. So we went the other direction, not so much that we're certifying people, but we want to enable people to do this well. And the other thing that's changed is we're no longer the only popsicle stand in the desert. There's lots of other classes at Stanford now. Everyone at Stanford and many other universities realizes we're in the middle of a massive crisis, a mental health crisis. So we have classes in health and resilience through a program called the Be Well program. We have classes in a thing called the Whole Student, Whole Stanford. We have purposeful living classes. We have some classes that come from the med school. We have classes that come out of the psych department. So there's a lot more places where students can try stuff. And you know, and we're just one of, we were never meant to be the only one or the best one. We're just one of the other ways that you might approach this. If you're a philosophically inclined student, take the purposeful living class from the philosophy department. If you just want a health and wellness intervention, take the class from the medical school. And if you want to try something, you know, that encourages not only that, but your creativity and personal agency and other stuff, take our class. But any way you get there is a good thing, because we have a lot of problems with all the things Rick talked about on campus. Campus surveys show historically high levels of stress, loneliness, and anxiety. I'm sure on your own campuses you're seeing the same thing. And it's troubling. I've had, you know, so we have an office of accessibility, and you can get a letter that you give your professor that says, hey, I have a thing I need some extra help with. I have a hearing disability. I need the slides in advance. I have something. I used to get one of those letters maybe a year, and I teach 6 classes with maybe 300 students. And I get 2 of those a class now. Because the students are more aware that they, to ask for help, which is great. Startlingly, I also get the report from students that we're the only class that made an accommodation for them. They gave the letter to the other professors who said, thank you very much, and then nothing happened. So it's interesting. So anyway, we don't talk about the class now so much as a design class. It's a design thinking class. You'll learn some design. But this is really all about establishing identity, establishing purpose, and establishing a sustainable way of being a student or being a human on this planet. And one of the new exercises, you saw the original frameworks and stuff. I mean, since 2007 to today, I've got folders and folders and folders and folders of slides and activities we don't use anymore. Because we're every class we're prototyping new things. The way I was taught as a young student that you use design to design. We prototype everything we try. We measure everything we prototype, and we constantly iterate towards what we think is a better solution. And recognizing that the students are a moving target, we message to where they're at. Where they're at today is health, wellness, and sustainable lives. So one of the cool things we do now is we have a thing called the Power of the Pause. This is, you can't see it very well on the picture, but we happen to have a beautiful organic farm on our campus. which is just down the street from where we teach. It's a lovely place, you know, and we actually, it's part of the School of Sustainability where they're doing research on sustainable farming methods. And so we take the students to the farm for a pause day. Our classes are 2-hour studios. So they're used to something strange happening. We take them to the museum. We take them to the art. We have an amazing art collection, the Anderson Collection. We take them all over campus. But we take them there because it's a wonderful kind of disruptive setting. It doesn't feel like you're on the campus anymore. You're in the middle of this big organic farm, and we go into this kind of funky high-tech barn. And we do a bunch of exercises, including, as this class starts, please hand me your cell phone. We collect everyone's cell phone. This is challenging for them. And some of the students are very anxious, and when we take their phone away. And then we go through a series of exercises, including a silent reflection where you write on a Post-it how are you really feeling today? I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling stressed, I have midterms, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling happy, whatever you're feeling. You put the Post-it on your chest, and you just walk around silently without words and acknowledge each other. Because what we've discovered is they don't know how to make eye contact. There's no phone between me and you. It's just you and me. You know, humans in a beautiful place, just trying to see each other. At the end of this, we give them back their phones and we ask the question, did anything happen that you needed to respond to? And 100% of the time, nothing happened. Just a bunch of stupid texts that mean nothing. Despite that, they're anxious about having missed something. But they report later that that was the most important class in the sequence because it touched, they got a chance to sort of reach into or touch something in themselves that they didn't know was there. And this is the whole thing with the loneliness and anxiety epidemic. They're so out of touch with their bodies. And we make the point in the very first class, you are not just a brain on a transport mechanism that takes your brain to class. You're an embodied intelligence. You think with your body, you think with your mind, your body, your heart, everything. And they just need some help getting back to that experience. So anyway, this is the way we message the class now. And it's still very popular and it's doing well. And a little while back, and the goals are the same. When we say conscious competency and vocational wayfinding, life and vocational wayfinding, you can be an unconscious incompetent, you don't know you suck. You can be a conscious incompetent, which is actually the learning quadrant. I know I don't know something. You can be an unconscious competent, you're a natural. Here, what's this? It's a golf club. What do you do with it? You swing it. 300 yards down the middle. Awesome. How'd you do that? I don't know. Do it again. That's amazing. You're a natural. But you can't teach anybody. If the situation changes, you're not a natural anymore because it only worked for one situation, and you can't teach anybody how you did it. So our goal is conscious competency. I know how to navigate life. I know how to wayfind into the future, because wayfinding is different than navigation. If I know where I'm going, I put it in the GPS, I get a path. If I don't know where I'm going, how do I get there? We used a study about hunters in Lapland and very, very far north in Norway and Sweden, where the hunters are searching for animals, so reindeer to kill or something. And they don't know where the reindeer are, but they know they have a heuristic for finding reindeer. So they go to some place and they look for tracks, and then they either go left or right, and they go to that next place and they look for some other signs, and then eventually they have this line that kind of looks like this and this and this and this, and they backtrack. Eventually they find an animal, they kill it, and then navigating back to home is fine. They dress the animal, bring it home. The shortest distance between finding the animal home is a straight line. Literally the shortest distance between starting and finding the animal is a line that looks like this. That is the shortest distance. If you're a master hunter, you know that's the shortest distance. So we're trying to teach them how to find their way into a future for which there is no data. You'll just have to figure it out. But you prototype your way forward, you build your way forward, and you navigate your way forward. And then when you get there, you know what you know it because you know what you were looking for, because you did your, life view, worldview. So those are the same. Eventually, you develop intuitive competence. You just do this all the time. But if somebody asks you how you do it, you can turn on the closed captioning and tell them. It's designed to help students get more out of college, not cram more into college. It is such a transformational experience if you just stop and take a breath and stop, in my case, stop trying to get in. You're there. You're the dog that caught the car. Great. You've been chasing cars your whole life. You caught the car. Now what are you going to do with it? All right. We're actively seeking new students. In 2020, the beginning of 2020, or 2022, I said to the lab, okay, we got a bunch of students, but it seems like they're the same students all the time that are coming, and they're great. I want to know why aren't the other students coming? Go figure it out. I want more students. And so Shanice Webb said, well, I don't see a lot of black kids in our classes. Let me go find out why. She went and talked to the Black Student Union. There's a coalition of black students. There's a dorm for the black students. And she came back and she said, they don't feel comfortable in DC. She doesn't feel like it's their place. They're intimidated by the whole design idea because they don't think they're creative. And they don't see anybody over there that looks like them. I said, great. Prototype something for me. So she put together a class originally called Designing the Black Experience at Stanford. She wanted 10 students. She picked 10 students, applied. She ran the first class. By the second class, there were 30 students in the room. And then there were 45, and we said, you have to stop. It's not a prototype anymore, it's a class. And I hadn't actually pulled a number for it, so we were running it under my independent study number, which is illegal. But we break a lot of rules. And she ran the class, and it was amazing, and we learned stuff, and now it's a class, and we're running it every quarter, and there's 45 or 50 students in it. And we learned 3 things. One, we now call it the Black Experiences, because there isn't a singular black experience at Stanford. Shanice teaches with a woman from the Career Center named Arun. Arun grew up in Cameroon. Arun, like, the first time I knew I was black was when I came to America. And all of a sudden, people were treating me differently, and I was, what the heck's going on? And, well, how come people don't look like me? What's going on? And Shanice grew up in Atlanta and New Orleans, and so she's, a product of America's system and knows about systemic racism. And the kids come from all over the place. We have international kids, and kids are first gen, and kids come from parents who are, highly educated. So there isn't a singular experience. But one of the things they said is this is the only class on the campus where we're all black students, and we don't have to code switch. We don't have to pretend we're white like we have to do in the other classes. And this is the only place where we feel like we can show up and actually talk about the experience we're having, our lives. And when we took your other class, we had to leave that out. So how do you design your life if you have to leave out your experience of life? And so we've determined this is a huge unaddressed need. And it's interesting because, particularly with the black students on campus, everybody else thinks they're doing fine. They're not doing fine. Not doing fine at all. So this is going to be a big effort for us in the future. And then I looked around the group and I said, what else? Who else could we talk to? We have working with a guy named Jay Aziz, and he went over to the office of. We have the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life at Stanford. It's a multi-denominational thing. When Jane Stanford established the university, the first thing she built was the church, but she insisted it be multi-denominational, and so that's all. Religion isn't a part of the Stanford curriculum, but it's a part of Stanford life, and we recognize spirituality in all of its forms. So I met Dr. Amina Darwish, the chaplain for the Muslim students. The fact that we have a female chaplain for the Muslim students shows we're a little bit on the liberal side of things. But she said, yeah, the Muslim students don't feel comfortable on campus either. There's a huge, if you identify as Muslim and you identify physically, you have a headscarf or whatever, you identify as Muslim, and kids can recognize that. There's Islamophobia on campus. There's a whole, we don't want to talk about religion on campus. And these students really don't feel like they're part of that experience. I said, okay, we'll do the same thing. Sneak it in under my independent study number. I just want 10 students. We had 10 the first time, 30 the next time, 45 the next time. Had to get a new studio, had to get a bigger room. We do two things in the class which I think are extraordinary. One is the class goes through sundown because it's the only time I could get a room. So we break for prayer. And the students have their prayer rugs. And they break and do the prayer rituals. And then they come back and we finish class, and it's extraordinary. The way the class just opens up and just creates space. And the students soften and they talk to each other. And then at the end of class, she leads another exit prayer. I'm an existential atheist. I don't believe in God. And so I really shouldn't be in the room, but there's nobody who can do the design stuff. So I'm in the room for the design stuff. And I leave the room when they talk about their faith and how it works. But I've learned so much from this group of students. They're amazing. Our empathy, define, express, test, cycle. That exact thing is in the Quran. The exact thing. Different words, same thing. It's extraordinary to be listen to them talk about their experience at Stanford. They're really not comfortable. I mean, they can't talk about to other students. And it's not just I've talked to the Jewish chaplain or the Jewish rabbi, and I've talked now with the woman, the dean who runs the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. It's not hip to talk about God at Stanford. I don't know what it is in your communities, but it's not hip. Kids don't talk about it. Because, if it's Islam, it's wrapped up in the politics of that. If it's Christians wrapped up in the politics of that, it's just become something that's not talked about. And therefore, the students cannot actually design a life that includes the most important thing to them, their spirituality, because there's no place to have this conversation. It goes right back to the very first, that little workshop I did where the kids stayed till midnight. There's no place to have this conversation on campus. Thank you for creating that opportunity and for giving us a framework, a scaffolding to have the conversation. So I think these affinity groups will continue, although I don't think I can do every single group. But I think there are groups on campus who really don't feel like they are full participants in campus life. And that's what we're trying to fix, and that's what we're trying to figure out. So that's really exciting for us. In 2007, we did our first pilot. We're now up to 320 colleges that have come to Stanford and have been trained on the principles of the life design class for freshmen or seniors or grad students, or as part of a health and wellness program, however they want to implement it. And of those, we have some really big super notes. Johns Hopkins, so the guy who runs he calls it the Life Design Lab and Career Center at Johns Hopkins. His name's Farouk Day. He used to run our career center. We were doing a bunch of stuff with him. Then he went to Johns Hopkins. And then I find out he's calling it the Life Design Lab. So I called him up, and he's paid me $1 royalty for that name. But they're doing a big program at Johns Hopkins, and it's across the board. Because his theory is, the Career Center doesn't start senior year when you're looking for a job. The Career Center starts the moment you hit campus, and we start talking about what's a meaningful life, what's a meaningful career. So he's doing great work. Curtin University in Australia and the Australia Television Educational Network now have a full online program, and the Curtin's got 15 campuses around Southeast Asia. They're doing it. And then Rodney Rogers, who will be speaking next after me at Bowling Green State, called us up and said, we want to be the first, big public school that life design is a thing. Can you come help us? And so I went out with one of my fellows, and we did a training for 3 days, and they've implemented a fantastic program he's going to tell you about. And this is the kind of stuff we're trying to figure out how to do now, is just scale it to everyone. For the cost of just running the workshop, I'll give the curriculum away to anybody who wants it. But I got to show you how to use it the right way, right? Because it's a framework and a bunch of ideas and tools, and when you reach into the toolbox and you're looking for this, you know, for the hammer, I don't want you to accidentally grab the saw and hurt yourself. So we'll show you how to do it. And then you can do whatever you want with it. It's a learning and teaching community. I describe it as, we're going to give you the whole Lego set, all 700 pieces. I'll show you how to build the plane, and I'll show you how to build the submarine and the duck. But you can build anything you want. But let me at least show you how, you know, how we put a few things together. And then please join our research and learning and research community and share what you come up with. And one of the top researchers in this area, because we believe it's got to be based on evidence, Dr. Heather Butler, who's down at Cal State Dominguez Hills in Southern California. She's in the psych department, so she loves to do the before and after assessment stuff, and she's got tons of these, including, you know, career anxiety goes way down, career search knowledge goes way up, career confidence, career insight, career certainty and self-efficiency, but also purpose, gratitude, love, smart goal setting, grit, Angela Duckworth's thing, Martin Seligman's PERMA scale, intentional self-regulation. She's seeing huge results. Her CSU Dominguez Hills is in Compton, California. Most of their all of their students are first gen. 80% of their students are underrepresented minorities. And she's seeing better results than we get, and our theory is they have no frameworks. They're the first kid to go to college, and they can't ask their parents what college is for. They don't have an uncle, you know, who went to college or something. So they have to construct everything from first principles, and these classes give them frameworks to build on that are really, really helpful. Her super best success story, because she's been doing this, she was doing this for a couple years just off the book before we met her, and we said, hey, you know, let us help you out here. Like, come, we'll give you the rest of the Legos. The book only contains a tiny fraction of what's actually in the class now, because it was frozen in time in 2015 and you know, issued in 2016. So there, you know, she has a student who was literally homeless and living in her car and going to Dominguez Hills, you know, just to try to get to the next level, you know, to some kind of stability, getting her PhD with Heather in psychology. We learn a lot. The students are our best teachers. You know, I'll just highlight a couple things. First of all, expect the students to treat each other wonderfully when they get in a table of 6. They are kind to each other. They want to connect. They just need a little help. Painkillers versus vitamins. There's an old thing in Silicon Valley that you only invest in painkillers, you don't invest in vitamins. Vitamins are nice to have. We discovered the freshman class was like a nice to have class because we said, what's the problem? They go, no problem, I got in. I go, well, how about college? Yeah, I'll figure that out later. Whereas the seniors are like, help me, help me, help me. I'm about to graduate and I don't know what to do. So watch out for painkillers versus vitamins. It's much better to sell painkillers. Run lots and lots of prototypes. And then our big rule is we don't shit on students. I never tell students what to do. I don't tell them you should do this. That's not our bias. Our bias is you're the designer. Here's the tools. Figure it out. Because ultimately you have to be the authority of your own life. It's about agency. So I think I've hit all 3 of your points. Agency, and they do a great job doing it. And stick to your construct. Our construct is design, and designing into your life. We are not psychologists. We are not the philosophy department. We don't do any of that stuff. Our colleagues are amazing. Every institution is different. A prototype is what you try to learn something. A pilot is what you do to scale. Don't confuse the two. And yeah, caring educators are wonderful people. What's next is more affinity spaces, more collaborations, the athletic department, staff, student affairs. We're experimenting with getting in the residence and doing stuff there. The Life Design Studio, we opened it, we keep thinking this is going to end and we've run out of people, but we opened the June studio and it was filled in 48 hours. So if you'd like to come to a studio, or if we'd like to do a CLTE studio, let me know. We can figure it out. But these things fill up pretty fast. And then we are starting an institute in Singapore to hold all the IP and to change the narrative in Southeast Asia about what education is for. That's about it. Thank you. All right. Even though Rick went a little over, I finished on time. So he's going to give me a chance to to answer a few questions if you have them. And there is a person running around with a microphone. So if you raise your hand, she'll give you a mic so that people online can hear it and we can capture it for the recording. And I'm happy to take questions. And I told this story last time I was here. So if you heard it before, I apologize for repeating myself. But professors always say, the students don't ask questions. Why don't they ask questions? And so some researchers went into like 300 different classrooms and, 120 or 150 different professors. And they just measured one thing. What's the time between the professor says, do you have any questions? And the time they say, okay, let's keep going. And the average time was 1.2 seconds, which is why they don't get any. They don't really want questions. I want questions. I could stand up here for a while. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So you certainly alluded to this, and it's certainly part of the way that this is moving. But talking about first-generation students, and specifically students who are coming to college for, as you said, for the job and the income and the support that they can provide. I mean, that's extremely real to all of them, and it's a mindset that's deeply ingrained when they show up to college, that this is what I must do, and I shouldn't stray from that path. Can you just talk a little bit more about how you overcome that, how you work through that, work with that, to help these students get beyond just the imperative of the degree and the job?
Yeah, I'd say it's more working with that, because I want to honor the fact that you come from a community, first gen, you're coming from Malaysia, or Indonesia, or Pakistan, and it's a privilege to be here, and your family's really stretching hard for you to be here. It's interesting, and my Muslim students who are foreign students coming from those places, their parents were like, well, you can go to Stanford for 4 years if you want, but when you come back, you're going to get married, and you're going to, and you're going to be in the community, and you're going to do the right thing. And they don't reject that. They think that's wonderful, that they have the privilege to be here. So we work with them to define, well, in your case, there's going to be 3 Odyssey plans, all of which will be returning to your community. But returning to your community, how? And how do you want to show up there? And what do you want to learn here that will make that effective there? So, the fact that, we say there's 3 reasons to go to college: career readiness, we say, it's not everybody says, career readiness, life of the mind, and discovering yourself. And then we have a thing where we say, get up, walk to the corner of the room. Are you about career readiness, life of the mind, or discovering yourself? And even the students that come from those communities are our fly students. And this year, admissions, I think, was like 40% of the students admitted to Stanford are first gen. So we're really trying to, break the cycle and get more kids in. They'll still walk over to discover myself, life of the mind. But the backstory is I'm here at the great expense to my family, even though, Stanford is free. Stanford is completely free for any student whose parents make less than $150,000. And 70% of the students are on financial aid. So it's not the typical rich kid's school if you really look at the data. But I don't want to deny the reality. The reality is real. And in fact, I was talking to Dr. Darish, and I said, we got to get them to think more about different majors, because they all want to do CS, and they're probably not going to be, happy with that. And she said, Bill, you don't understand. If they're willing to let their parent pick the person they're going to marry, they're willing to let their parent pick their major. I said, that's an interesting point. Hadn't thought of that. So we don't should on them. If that's where they're coming from, we work with that. But we still get them to think, it's not just, and then I get a CS degree, and then I go back to Pakistan, and I'm a coder. There's many, many ways, to express that reality, and many, many more options than they think. Plus chat writes code, so that game's over. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. I resonated with everything that you said. It's happening at Villanova for sure. Could you just review the distinction between prototype and pilot? I feel like I've skipped over prototype and gone straight to pilot.
So I know it's just jargon in a way, but it's important. What we call a prototype is doing something to learn something. So I'm prototyping the Muslim class, even though it got too big, because I'm just trying. I actually went in and said, we're going to co-create this class. I have no idea how to teach this class. I don't know anything about your background. That's why, the chaplain is here. She's going to address that side of things. And I listed 30 exercises we could do. What do you guys want to do? And they'd pick, life of the mind and, finding myself, blah, blah. They all picked job finding. The 6 exercises that got all the votes were like, how do I do an interview? How do I find a job? I mean, it's just like all the other students, right? But so a prototype is when you do something to learn something and you expect it to fail, and it is at lower resolution than the real thing. I'm just testing this one idea, or I'm just testing this one exercise. A pilot is when now we're ready to pilot a class called Designing Your Spiritual Life at Stanford. And then at the end of 5 weeks, I think what will happen is the Jewish kids will go off with the rabbi, the Muslim kids will go off with the chaplain, the Christian kids will go off with the priest and the other thing. And so 5 weeks of design, 5 weeks of designing into your faith, something like that. That will be the pilot, and then if that works, we'll scale it to be 3/4 long and 5 kids and da-da-da. But if you mix up trying to build something and test something while if you're trying to build the plane while you're flying the plane, you're probably going to crash. So prototypes are just small tests to see what works and what fails, both of which are learning. And then pilots are, okay, give me some money and let's scale this thing. One more question. In the back, yeah.
So you talked about 3 different types of classes. You talked about your life, your Stanford, and the profession. I'm kind of curious as to how many students take both your Stanford and your life. Or are you able, when you reach students as freshmen and sophomores and you talk about your Stanford, that they feel that they have the skills and necessary needed so that when they get to be juniors and seniors, they don't need the Design Your Life class?
Yeah, and it's about 50 kids a quarter in each of those classes, so 150 kids a year in Stanford, 150 kids a year in Designing Your Life, 200 or 300 grad students who actually take the professionals class, but they don't all sign up. And I was, I don't know if this is success or failure. I was really hoping all the kids who took Designing Your Stanford would then take Designing Your Life and sort of double down, and because it's a whole different class. And it's only about 50% of them take it again. And the other ones say, no, I'm good. Thank you. I figured this stuff out. So I guess that's good, although my sense of their ability to do self-assessment is they're pretty low. But yeah, it's maybe half or 40% take the follow-on class. The other thing we've tried, which didn't work, and I'm not sure why, is we thought, well, if we got the Designing Your Stanford class and they come out of it all excited, maybe we can create little affinity groups and they just keep meeting. And we had 4 or 5 programs trying that, including, here's money for pizza, because that generally gets students in a room. Here's money and we'll get you cool guest speakers. That's never persisted. And I think that's because the students are just so busy. It's enough to just fit in one studio class. But all these classes are electives. They don't count for anything other than units. So they take it because they need to. I think that's it. Thank you very much, Rick.
All right, that was terrific. Thank you, Bill. We are going to take a 15-minute break, so we'll come back at 10:20, and we'll start with our next talk on Design Your Life. Great, thanks.